So one of my biggest pet peeves with a lot of business research is the fact that we're supposed to come up with a why behind why something actually happens. And I'm a big proponent of that. I'm going to talk about some of this right now, but I also want to open it up and suggest something that is interesting. So there is this push. If you're a researcher and you've been following along with this channel, there is this push within almost all of the social sciences is to come up with a why. Why does something actually happen? And this is the genesis behind a lot of sort of feelings of what's actually going on within the profession, is that we are taught to sort of explain what's going on, of what we're supposed to do. That is the genesis of the birth of the social sciences. We're trying to explain why something happens. And then there was this moment for many years of that the explanations that we're supposed to have are supposed to be interesting. And now in the last, say 10 years, we're supposed to come up with explanations that hold validity and reliability. And that is fantastic. So validity means that it is sort of interpreting what it is supposed to interpret. When you get results, it's supposed to sort of say that this is truly what's actually supposed to go on in the real world or within the particular domain that you're actually looking at. So, the trouble with that is, to do this really well, is that you have to really take a deep dive into a particular really tiny phenomenon. And you also have to be able to explain something in a short, punchy thing, right? So humans want to have an explanation behind why something happens. This is the genesis behind a lot of sort of enlightenment thinking that has happened over many years and sort of built into the genesis of the social sciences, how we understand it today. So if you want to know how two things relate to each other, then we should have an explanation by why they actually relate to each other. Now, the problem that I see, it's not because it's not representative of the world. That's sort of the excuse that a lot of people hear, is that you are becoming more and more fine-tuned. It becomes less and less what's called, so fine-tuned, what I'm talking about is becoming more internally valid. The thing that you're looking at, you're explaining something a lot more rigorously, but at the same time, it becomes less relevant to the outside world. Now, what I'm more concerned about often is, do we actually need to know what is going on? And the explanatory value of things that are emerging in other fields, they kind of gave up on that, right? So machine learning, for example, gave up on, should we understand all the different steps on how actually we get there? So there's models like deep learning. I don't understand it as much as one would hope, but that's okay, right? You don't need to understand how things actually happen. And that's the genesis of what is going on. There's a whole bunch of stuff within engineering and the physical sciences that you really don't understand particular moments. There is this field of mathematics called numerical methods, which basically says we don't understand how this all works, and we don't need to understand everything, but we're just kind of fudging things a little bit here to get sort of a gist of what's actually going on. And that is totally fine, right? Like, not knowing how things work is totally fine. There's many problems that exist in this world that are incredibly difficult to explain. We will never understand them. We just don't have the computing power ever to be able to understand them. Even with the massive supercomputers that we have today, we just can't do them. And that is the beauty behind some things like deep learning algorithms, for example, machine learning, that they don't purport to really understand how things actually happen. They kind of make best estimated guesses of how to actually get there. And we can't backtrack. We can't sort of have explanatory value or explanatory reasons on why we actually get to the reason why we get there. And it's kind of like the way that the brain works, right? I don't know. It seems really strange for me to say, I'm going to think about all the different things that are going to happen today, and this is how we're going to execute on them. But that's not what actually happens, right? We kind of are a lot more free flowing. The brain is a really interesting beast, and how it works is that you don't need to know everything at any given moment. And that is fine. And we operate just fine. And we don't even many times we don't even do things, or we do many things without understanding, right? Or even acknowledging that we're actually doing these, right? Like, I don't think about having my heart beat. It just does it automatically. And yet there's a function of my brain that is making sure that my heart beats. And I want you to think about all these things that exist in this world that we will never understand, completely understand, things like, so for example, how the climate works. We could have the biggest computer models in the entire world with all of the available data, and we're never going to understand how this actually works, right? Or how a company actually works. Or, we have these massive amounts of data now, and we've arrived upon that moment. And this is why AI is such an important part, is that we have so much computed data and stored data, we just don't even know what to do with it. We are overloaded with data. And if we are to presume that we understand how everything works, we have to sort of logically connect to everything. There was this, years ago, we tried to, scholars tried to do this. It's called an enterprise resource planning software. And the idea was to have all the rules of how the world actually works through in the software, and we're going to come up with some great grand solution. The people that are actually doing this gave up on it. They said, this is impossible. We can never do this. It's a giant mess, and we're going to do other things and sort of do these sort of shortcut ways of doing things. It allows us to actually get there a little bit quicker, a little bit easier. So my presumption, where I want to go, is this idea that, why do we actually assume that we need to know everything? Like, why do we need to know why a relationship actually exists? This is a super tall order often, but not only that, it's extraordinary limiting on many of the things that we're going to see around us, right? If we presume that we understand how something actually happens, that is what's the word for it? That is very, very much a pompous way of looking at the world. And I use that very strongly. To presume that us as humans, or a single human, or a team of humans, can understand the world, that means that we think pretty highly of ourselves often. And we're never going to understand the whole world, right? Like, my default in how I look at the world is I don't understand it. But that doesn't mean we can't look at things and find things that are interesting and ponder about them and come up with something that is a loose description of what's going on. So in my view, if we want to make progress with a lot of science, we have to remove some of the constraints of internal validity. This idea that we have to have everything perfect and have some sort of explanation of what's going on, and be a lot more loosey-goosey with a lot of things. Yes, there is plenty of room for internal validity, but there's also plenty of room to be loosey-goosey and look at things that are just frankly curious or different, or some sort of pattern that we possibly can't explain, or maybe we can explain it. Why is that necessarily a bad thing? If we can explain somewhat how something happens, we should be able to record that as well. So my rant is to acknowledge we don't know the whole world. We never will. And that is perfectly fine. And I think we need more outlets to be able to do that, and to have more ability to be loosey-goosey with the things that we're looking at. All right, take care and have a wonderful day.